Good morning. Welcome everyone to Lifelines webinar. Before we start, I want to let you know that we have a special discount going on. It's a 20% discount for any prepaid kit order. The discount code is Telomeres26, so you just need to email us to info@lifelines.com. The promotion is valid until October 31st. Today you will be listening to our CEO, Stephen Matlin, who will do a presentation on telomere measurement and how this can improve your patient's quality of life, understanding telomere attrition, and how we can introduce a telomere program to actually change our patient's lifestyle, really focusing on our telomeres so that we can reduce telomere attrition, the speed of telomere attrition at the same time, improve our patient's quality of life. So I give you Steve. I hope you enjoy the presentation. And once more, I remind you, you have an icon on the top right of your screen that says chat. Just click on it and place your questions during the presentation. Once we finish, we will be happy to address your questions.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone for allowing us to spend some time together this morning. I'm going to spend about 40 minutes or so going through the presentation, and then we'll do some Q&A. So let's go ahead and get right in. So the index that we're going to look at is we're going to talk about why telomeres are the ultimate biomarker for aging, and just talk a little bit about the biology and the science that sits behind this field. And then we'll talk a little bit about why our test uniquely, we believe, is the reference test, and that if you are interested in measuring telomeres in your clinical practice, then you want to be working with us. And then we'll suggest some applications of how you can actually use this as a program to demonstrate efficacy in your wellness programs and your preventive medicine and personalized medicine programs with your patients, and show you how you can incorporate this into your practice. So let's just talk briefly about what telomeres are and why measuring them is really relevant. So if we think about the aging process, this is taken from a paper published in 2013 in Cell, which described 9 major causes of aging, as you can see here on the slide. And you can see in the lower right corner that the telomeres are one of the 9 causes that they cited. Now, we know a lot about telomeres. Telomeres are a field that have been researched going back to the 1930s. There have been 4 Nobel Prizes in this field since that time. There are something like 25,000 peer-reviewed clinical articles showing that telomeres are not only a major contributing factor to the aging process itself, but actually they are a contributing factor in causing most age-related diseases. And you can see here just a few of the thousands of articles that exist on telomeres as an independent biomarker for coronary heart disease, or telomere length and its a correlation to causing cancer and cancer mortality, and short telomeres being involved in the development of diabetes type 2, and many others. So just coming back to that first slide, what we can now, if we delve a little deeper into this, what we can now see is out of those 9 characteristics, we can actually break it into kind of 2 groups. On the one hand, we have some causes like mitochondrial dysfunction and the other 4 items that are highlighted in blue. And on the right-hand side, we have a group that are highlighted in yellow boxes: cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, inter-pore intercellular communication, and genomic instability. And then we have highlighted in red telomere attrition. And the reason that we've done that is because those 4 factors are principally due to telomere attrition. So actually, what we can see from this slide is that telomeres are directly and indirectly contributing factors to 5 out of the 9 causes of aging. And this is why we believe that telomeres are the single most important biomarker for looking at how an individual is aging in a biological way, as we're going to talk about as we go through the document. Now, the corollary to this, of course, is if we then wanted to reverse aging, we'd want to attack the most important cause of aging, and that would be, again, telomeres. And what we'd like to see is to be able to cause upregulation of the famous enzyme telomerase, which will cause telomeres to re-lengthen. And of course, there's a lot of things that people are doing. We'll talk about the end, some very pragmatic things that have been shown to at least slow the rate of attrition of telomere loss, and perhaps there are even things that can be done to revert it. If we did that at a cellular level, we would then be improving all of the other factors, the other 4 factors, clearing out senescent stem cells, increasing the potency of our stem cells. These other factors would also be improved, and hence would be slowing or perhaps even reversing the aging process. So let's look further into telomeres and aging. We know from very large epidemiological studies that have been conducted that telomeres shorten inexorably over time in all living creatures, and in this case, in the study involving more than 100,000 people. And what we can see from this is that the rate of shortening has a lot of ups and downs. It's moving around a lot, and that's because telomere length is very heterogeneous within the people, and it's also heterogeneous in the rate of the aging of an individual. So people can have slower or faster rate of telomere loss depending on their own personal situation. Greater inflammation, greater stress, greater solid turnover, faster aging. Maybe you go through a period of life where you're more relaxed or you take better care of yourself, slower aging. But inexorably over time, we can see that it's going downward, and therefore we know that it's correlated as a good biomarker of biological aging. Now, of course, we know what telomeres are, but just in case anyone is not already familiar with the subject, telomeres are the non-encoding caps found at the ends of all chromosomes that don't serve to encode, as I said, for proteins or gene expression, but rather are there to protect the genetic material that is coding for all of these things in the process of cellular duplication. And every time cells divide, those telomeres are whittled away a little bit, just like we can imagine the little plastic caps on shoelaces being gradually used up, if you will, if our shoelaces were replicating. And when they get critically short, then typically cells will go into what is called senescence and later into apoptosis. That is, they will stop dividing. And that is essentially a mechanism that's been designed to ward off or to reduce the potential for chromosomal fusions or breakages and increased risk of developing cancer. And this is also known, for those of you who are familiar with it, as the Hayflick limit. And it depends on cell type, but most cells will divide somewhere between 50 to 70 passages or doublings before they'll reach this limit. And therefore, if we measure the rate of the length of the telomeres, we have a good idea of how many times they've divided, and hence, if you will, it's a biological, very good biological clock that we can see that tells us just where is a cell and hence where is a person in terms of their aging process. Now, we care about this because as the cells replicate over and over and over again, and these telomeres whittle away, we have a greater percentage of our cells that are entering into the senescence process. And this senescence process, along with other factors that we looked at, is the primary driver of aging. So if we think about at an organ level, before we get to the, say, organismal level, looking at the heart, think about the endothelial cells inside the heart. That as we get older, we have more endothelial dysfunction because a greater percentage of those endothelial cells have exhausted their telomeres. They're now senescent. They can no longer reproduce. And what does that lead to? That leads to now the potential that individuals would say with high levels of cholesterol, they're going to see built up of fatty deposits, calcification in their arteries, because those smooth surfaces that are associated with younger and healthier organs are now wearing down. So we can see that this would be a contributing factor to cardiovascular disease. And indeed, the BMA, the British Medical Journal, BMG, excuse me, published an article that says that telomere length is an independent biomarker of cardiovascular disease. So this is why this is a critical biomarker for understanding not only human aging, but for risk of age-related diseases. And just coming back to the point of what makes a biomarker useful. Here you can see kind of in a bigger format the heterogeneity around the downward slope and another set of data, this one of about 800 people, from birth to 100 years. And you can see that the range of telomere length at birth is quite large, from 7 or 8 kilobases up to 12 kilobases. So really almost a 50 or 60% difference between those with the longest telomeres at birth and those with the shortest. And you can also see there's a good deal of scatter around the graph, meaning that not everyone is aging at the same rate. Of course, if all of the points were on the line, then there would really be no purpose in measuring telomeres because it wouldn't be something we could do anything about. But what we can see here is that somebody who might have been born, let's say, with great genetics, let's say 12 kilobases of telomeres at the top of the data set at the beginning, can nevertheless have a poor lifestyle, inflammation, poor diet, all those things that we know that lead to faster rates of aging. And he or she might be that person at 50 where you can see the dot with very, very short telomeres around 4 kilobases. And that person, because of all of these factors, has really exhausted their telomeres. That's led to a lot of chronic disease, heart disease, diabetes, potentially cancer, and that person at 50 has already now passed away. Whereas somebody else who might have been born with telomeres of 7 or 8 kilobases, you can imagine a line going out to the right, well above the line of the general graph. That person completely defies the general trend and keeps his telomeres at a very steady level and lives out to be 100 because he or she, perhaps not so gifted genetically, has done a great job in terms of their lifestyle, and therefore they've aged at a very slow rate, and they're able to have much longer longevity and perhaps even more importantly, much greater health span. So that's what makes for a good biomarker, because it allows us to look at the heterogeneous population, see where do people stand against the database, and also monitor over time to see how people are aging and how programs like the ones that you work with your patients can have efficacy and demonstrate that as positive feedback to the patients, or if the results are not so optimal, as an incentive to make change. Now, the last couple questions I want to address before we finish with the biology is you will be aware that we measure telomeres in blood, in peripheral blood and white blood cells, leukocyte telomere length. And so a good question that we get asked, or should be asked, is, well, how reflective is white blood cells of the overall organism? And the answer to that is it's a very good representation, and we know that because many studies have been conducted that have looked at the statistical correlation, something called the R-squared value, between the white blood cells telomere length and different tissues. In this case, muscle, fat, and skin in human beings, and in other studies that have been performed on laboratory animals, specifically mice, where they've sacrificed the mice and they've looked at telomere length and its correlation with all of the other tissues, brain, spleen, heart, lungs, liver, and so forth. And there's a very strong relationship. So the conclusion of this is that generally, leukocyte telomere length is a very good representation of the overall organism. So it's a good biomarker for overall biological aging, not only in blood, but in the human being. Now, we said earlier that genetics play a role in lifespan and health span, but the other two factors that we think are far more important and are the only ones over which we can have some control, at least today, are environmental factors and, of course, most importantly of all, lifestyle. And if we combine those three things in an equation, genetics, environmental, and lifestyle, those are the things that are impacting on the rate of our telomere attrition. And for those people who are aging slowly, they're going to have the ability to have slower aging, or to be able to undertake earlier therapeutic interventions, longer life, longer health span, and from the societal perspective, lower cost, more productive individuals for the society. And for those who don't take care of themselves, of course, this is going to lead to the onset of age-related diseases, all of which, as I say, have telomere length as a causal factor, some more than others, and there are many hundreds and thousands of articles in some cases that demonstrate this. And those individuals with accelerated aging are going to find themselves having early onset of age-related diseases where interventions, therapeutic interventions are much more restricted. You're looking now at using pharmaceutical drugs really to treat the symptoms, but not really to address the root underlying causes. And those people inevitably are going to be condemned to shorter lifespans, far worse health spans, with much greater societal cost. So this is really an important opportunity that we have to be able to use this tool in preventative medicine to avoid or ameliorate the onset of disease and make changes before it's too late. So just in summary, why should we care about telomeres? Well, in our telomeric-centric view of the world, telomeres are kind of the starting point from which we create DNA and cellular damage, and that cellular damage is manifested by senescent cells, which then, as we said before, impacts on the functionality and the ability of our organs to do their jobs. And as those tissues and tissue systems and organs are compromised, we then lead to disease states and outcomes. And so really this goes across every major disease that's age-related that you can just think about, that you could possibly think about. And therefore we think that telomeres really are something that should be in every physician's repertoire as a tool for assisting patients who are concerned with how well they're aging and how do they postpone or ameliorate the onset of age-related diseases. And this is just, again, a summary of some of those things. As we get short telomeres, we have this loss of tissue renewal, we have the failure of our stem cells to be able to divide in sufficient numbers, a general decline in our immune system response, and these are then all leading to the diseases we already talked about on the right-hand side. Now let's move on. I think we've discussed the basics of telomere biology, and certainly we could speak for it much more, but I think it'd be hard for anyone, hopefully not, to realize how important telomeres are fundamentally to health, to lifespan, and to their role in age-related diseases. So let's talk about now why you want to measure telomere length with life length, and why our technology is so much more clinically valuable than anything else that you could find in the market. So there are 3 real commercial technologies that are available today. qPCR, which will measure the average telomere length in a cell population. Flow cytometry, which will give you average telomere length by cell, and telomere analysis technology by life length, or TAT, which will give you not only the average telomere length in the population, but actually give you the median as opposed to the mean telomere length, and the percentage of short telomeres. And I'll go into more about our technology in a minute. So if we just look at the bottom part of the graph, let's just look at some of the factors that are relevant for you as doctors in selecting a technology you want to work with. First, we can look at scalability, and you could think, well, why is it important to me about the scalability? Well, that really goes to making something affordable. Handmade shoes are beautiful, but they're very, very expensive. If you want to sell thousands of pairs of shoes, you gotta scale it up. So Flowfish is a very unscalable technology in our view, certainly relative to the others, and therefore it's hard to get Flowfish to a point where it's a cost-affordable technology, whereas we've made great strides in really bringing our price down very significantly from when we set up this company some years ago. In terms of reliability, though, we then have a problem with PCR. Reliability has to do with how reproducible an assay is. And I'll give an example. PCR can have coefficients of variation of up to 20 or even more %. And so that, in the world of, say, cholesterol testing, let's take an analogy where people are maybe more familiar, could mean that a same sample run 3 times could give you a whole cholesterol number of 200 on the first run, 240 in the second run, and 160 on the third run. So you would have a range there where for the same sample run 3 times, you have results that are either very good, borderline high, or potentially you're discussing with a patient whether they need to be taking a statin. So that is really not going to be a very good clinical test if you've got a 20% variability around what is considered the acceptable value of 200. That's kind of what happens with PCR. It's a test that just intrinsically lends itself to a high level of CV. It's very difficult to get this assay to be very reproducible. Whereas with our technology, we typically have CVs of 5 or less %. And finally is the clinical value. And here's where the other 2 technologies, in our view, fall down. And this is because average telomere length isn't really clinically insightful. And I'll explain this again with another analogy. Average telomere length almost always looks relatively good, but telomeres do not have a bell-shaped distribution. They have if you look at the distribution of telomeres in chromosomes in a cell, you have a lot of shorter telomeres and then a long tail. And all of us will remember from our math that when you do averages, an average is greatly influenced by an outlier number, whereas the median is the central value of your data set. Now, this is relevant because it's the shortest telomeres in the cell that cause cells to become senescent. And so if you look at averages, you're never going to see that information. And the analogy that I wanted to use, that I always use, is imagine we have an average, we're driving a truck, we have an 18-wheel truck, and we have a pressure gauge that says the average tire pressure across our 18-wheel truck, and we get 1 flat tire. Well, that pressure is going to go down very little because we've got pressure of 0 in 1 tire, but good pressure of 17 out of 18 tires. So you're going to see a very small drop, less than 5% in tire pressure. So you're not going to see a red flag go off if you've got this average number. You're not going to be very concerned about that. But of course, if that tire happens to be the left front tire of your truck and you're going into a sharp turn, potentially your truck could turn over with that situation. So that's actually very dangerous. So what you really want to look at is the tire pressure by wheel, because what's really important is not the average, it's the individual tire pressures in each and every wheel. And in fact, in modern trucks, tire pressure is individually monitored for every wheel, because that's what's relevant. Well, here's the same thing. We are looking at the individual telomeres in each chromosome, each cell. And we are the only company in the world that offers and makes this available, this technology to you, with a U.S. federally CLIA accredited assay. So that's really the reason that we think that the TAT stands out objectively above the other technologies that can be used today. And by the way, we do all these technologies in our lab, so we really speak with expertise when we're discussing this. Now, just to show you that it's not just us saying this, this is a paper that's already now almost 17 years old that was published in part by Dr. Carol Greeter, the Nobel laureate of 2009, and the title is pretty clear. Shortest telomere, not average telomere length, is critical for cell viability and chromosome stability. So it's those short telomeres that are the bad actors. They're the ones that trigger the cells to become senescent, largely as a mechanism to ward off the potential development of cancer. But if you're looking at averages, you're never going to see that. So you really need to look for technology that will give you this kind of insight, which is what we are able to uniquely provide. And here you can see it. This is just a little extract from the report, and you can see we're reporting median telomere length, average telomere length, and that important percentage of short telomeres. And what's really important is these graphs that you see, because we have a very large database of people, those graphs are specific to the chronological age of the patient. Because if you simply took a standard graph, as a lot of people do, and you map all data against a standard range, well, you can think about that because telomeres do shorten over time, you can imagine that for older people, they're always going to end up being to the left-hand side of the graph in the short and very short ranges, and younger people are going to invariably be in the long and very long range, because you're comparing all the people against a standard set of numbers. What we've been able to do is our data is so rich that we actually compare your patients against patients of that same age, because that's really relevant. Because if I compare my 50-year-old telomeres against 20-year-olds, well, I'm always going to look a lot worse than most of those 20-year-olds. What I want to do is how am I aging against people of my similar age to have real clinical insight. So, as I said, the critically short telomeres are the important thing. And here you can see a picture on the left-hand side of what's called a metaphase spread. That is a photograph taken of chromosomes which are dividing. And you can see the telomeres on the tips of all of these chromosomes. And you can see some are brighter than others. And the way that we do this is because the telomeres are so short, they measure only about 10 nanometers in length. You cannot measure telomeres by looking at them. You can't see telomeres in an optical microscope. They're too short for that. So what we end up doing is using a technology, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute, that allows us to measure the fluorescent intensity that these telomeres produce when illuminated using a confocal, a very specialized microscope called the confocal microscope system. And this is really what's allowing us to see the heterogeneous nature of the telomere length, even within the nuclei of a single cell. And this is a bit more just how we do this. So what we do is we use a chemical probe, which is called a PNA, and that will hybridize, or in a simpler way, just bind to the telomere, and only the telomere, because the telomere has this very specific sequence of nucleic structure, which we have designed the probe to bind to. And the brighter the spot, the longer the telomere. So the longer the telomere is, the more probe is going to be binding to that telomere, and the greater the fluorescent intensity that it's going to produce. And then our algorithms, the software and all of the work that sits behind this, is going to allow us to transform those fluorescent spots into kilobase pairs and produce the report that we give to you. And we take, just so you know, we take about 75 images from 5 replicates of every sample in our lab and generate more than 200 megabytes in data and images of a single patient sample and over 1 million or close to 1.2 million numeric values of measurements in order to get that report. So there's a lot of mathematics, algorithms, and number crunching that sit behind this in order to get to the data that we provide you in our reports. As I said, and just to conclude on this, we are, I think, modestly, we can say, without blowing our horns too hard, we are really the world leader in this field. We are the only lab in Spain, which is a U.S. federally certified CLIA lab. We also hold an ISO 15189 accreditation, which is recognized around the world. We're accredited, of course, here by the Spanish Ministry of Health, as well as by the A2LA Association with their platinum accreditation. So you can be confident that when you're submitting your samples to us, this is being done in a CLIA certified environment. We were originally a spinoff of the Spanish National Cancer Research Institute, so we come with a great academic track record of bringing science to clinical application. And we're unique in the world in what we offer. There's no one else today, I don't know, it doesn't matter what they tell you, that has a technology like ours, which is a proprietary new technology, fruit of over 6 years and many, 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 many tens of millions of dollars of investment to bring it to this level of clinical robustness. So how do I use this test in my practice? Very briefly. Well, the first question, the question that you're always addressing every day is, we're living in a world of longer lifespans. But really the question that people are concerned about is that just going to translate into more added years of illness and dependency, or really more years of being healthy? I think we can all agree that that living a long time with poor health is not very exciting. What we all want to do is what we see here. So here we have two graphs. One is might be called like a typical health evolution, where people start seeing declining health, the first signs of aging in their late 20s, early 30s, and by the time in their 40s, they're definitely feeling it. And then it really accelerates as we get into our later years. And with mortality coming, say, perhaps on average in the mid-80s for most people in the developed world. But what we really want is this blue line. This is kind of the potential for every one of us, which is to maintain our health as much as possible, to have some, of course, inexorable decline, but as little as possible, and to push out lifespan to, say, 100 years, but really maintaining health span. So we have all that area between the two graphs, if you will, is greater quality of life. And that's just greater quality of life in every way, physical and mental. The ability to do more things, to be more active, to be more involved, and that's really what we want. And that's possible if we can slow the aging process. And so we need to be able to monitor this to see if we're on that path. Now, we said before that genetics play a role. We can't change that. That's why it's in that dark blue. That'll come in the future, but today we can't change that yet. And environment plays a role, and that could be changed, but it's not that easy to move from one city to another. If you live in a very contaminated city and you're breathing every day a lot of pollution and traffic fumes, that's not healthy for you, but it's not easy to change necessarily immediately where you live. So we really focus on lifestyle. This is the factor that we all have the opportunity, if we have the personal discipline, to really make an impact. So let's dig into lifestyle. So what do we propose a specific program that we think that you as physicians should be able to be doing with every one of your patients? If you have been listening, if you listen to what we've discussed today and you think that this is relevant, this is something that should be a standard of care for your existing and new patients. To say, we're going to set you up in a program, and we're going to start with getting a baseline TAT test to see where do you stand biologically, how have you aged due to genetics, environment, and lifestyle to this point in time today, wherever you are, for good or bad. And then we're going to remeasure you in a year's time. And during that time, you're going to have this person hopefully undergoing a thorough program focusing on improving their nutrition, exercising more regularly, at least not having a sedentary lifestyle, doing meditation, a lot of other things that we're going to talk about in a minute, and then we're going to remeasure. And this is really an opportunity to look at the efficacy of the program, because we know that people who undertake these programs and are sustained and disciplined about it can see not only a dramatic slowing in the rate of attrition, and in some cases even a reversal of telomere loss. So this is a tool, therefore, to look at this and see if the program works, and conversely, if it's not working, because one of the big problems in all these lifestyle programs is compliance, right? Patient says they go to the gym 3 times a week, 4 times a week. Do they really do that? What do they do at the gym? How hard do they work out? How intense is the exercise? You, as a physician, don't really know. And generally speaking, people exaggerate what they're saying. And the reverse is also true. They can say that they, have cut way back on their alcohol consumption, or they've stopped smoking socially, or whatever it may be. But generally, people will also tend to, downplay what they do. So this is a way that if something's not working, you're going to say, well, either they're not telling you the truth, or there's some real fundamental issues that are not working here. So let's talk about some of those things that we all know that we should be doing, but not necessarily every one of us does with the consistency every day. And exercise is clearly a key one. And there's hundreds of papers on the importance of exercise to maintaining telomere length. And we can all say, yeah, I know that, and I don't need a test to tell my patients that they should exercise more. But what we're proposing here is a tool that's going to look at not only exercise, but diet, but nutrition, stress, all of these factors combined together. And objectively, how is that impacting on their cellular rate of aging and hence on their rate of biological aging as a human being over a period of time? And you're not going to get that there's really no other tests that are going to do this. So this is one example that we cite. There are many others. Exercise are a key component to any program. We're all human beings, and human beings for thousands and thousands of years never sat at desks. We never had sedentary lifestyle. So the dramatic changes that have undergone society in a period of nothing, not even 100 years, have radically changed the way in which we live our lives, and that's bringing enormous health problems as a consequence. And then, of course, diet. Now, we focus a little bit on Mediterranean diet. You could just broadly say having a healthy diet if you don't like this particular term. But a healthy diet with low saturated foods, with lots of green vegetables, with good omega-3s, all of these things are critical towards being healthy. So avoiding processed foods, avoiding fatty acids. And here are some of the things that we all know that are just so critical to being healthy. It's not and with patients, what we've seen in our experience is you got to make things sustainable. You can't be so Taliban about things that you say you just have to do this 100%. What you have to do is people have to make a gradual move towards having better nutrition and feel the benefits and the little wins. And yes, you can go off the bandwagon and have a big cheeseburger with, and overeat one day, but it's about what you do on a sustained level. And it's really important that people begin to realize that. And I think the emergence of health foods and whole foods and this whole change is showing that, and organic foods. So I think, again, this test really fits with people who are concerned about that because they're spending far more money on the quality of their nutrition than it would cost them to do this test, and yet this test is going to give them insight to the effectiveness, the efficacy of that effort they're making in their diet. And then we have things like the things that we know that we shouldn't do. I won't dwell on this. This is pretty clear. And then there are other things that are really important, like mindfulness and meditation. And, I was always very skeptical or very critical of the kind of yoga crowd and Pilates. For me, it was all about really hard exercise and working out. But I think that what's really important is if you enjoy yoga and you enjoy Pilates, then do those things. What's really important more than that is the ability to disassociate for a period of time from your stressful environment. And that can be those kinds of activities, or it can be just simply turning off your phone and going for a walk on the beach, or for a bike ride, or playing Frisbee with your kids, or whatever that is that allows you to kind of separate from the stress that we all suffer from, whether it's financial or personal or job-related. Everyone has stress, and it's important to compartmentalize that stress and be able to get away from it for a time. And there's a lot of articles that have now convincingly showed that really mental health translates to physical health. If you don't have your mental health, then it translates to your physical health, and that translates to your telomeres as well. So this is really important. This particular article, one of the co-authors is Dr. Blackburn, again, another of the Nobel laureates from 2009. So, when you have a lot of stress, of course, then you don't have good sleep, and this affects your hormonal levels, it affects insulin production, it affects the cellular oxidation, and that's kind of the last point here is sleep. Sleep is critical, and as a kind of cured or retired investment banker, for a long time I always thought, sleep was for the weak, and 4 or 5 hours of sleep, that was a sign of strength, that I could get up and work, go to bed at 2 and be back in the office at 7. And, when you're young, you can do those things, but it has an impact. And the point is, people who say that they can get by on 5 hours of sleep, they're fooling themselves. And what you should say is, we'll see how much more productive you are if you get 7 hours of sleep. Because sleep is something that we need. It's part of nature. Every animal sleeps. Your body needs it to recover. And it's not just sleeping, but it's quality of sleep. And I think too many people don't get quality of sleep because we go to bed with our cell phones. We wake up in the middle of the night, we look at our cell phones. We just don't have a good sleep environment. So this is another important factor. When you do hard exercise, you don't get stronger doing the exercise. You get stronger when you're sleeping, when you're recovering from the exercise. So these are all things that need to be put together into a program. And hence, this is the summary of the program. As we said, we think time 0, let's say your baseline test. Begin to incorporate all these things in your lifestyle. If you're already doing them, great. If you're not, start. Anyone can improve. This is something that could be done by somebody who's at 20 because they've got lots of years ahead of them, and therefore it's a great time to be tested at 20. But it's also a great time to be tested at 60, particularly if you want to live to be 100. So really there's an opportunity for people to do this at any point in their life, and it's pretty well demonstrated that anybody can improve their health from wherever they are at any time. Not all of us can become superstar athletes, but we can always become fitter and stronger than wherever we currently stand. So this is really a program that we think is a very powerful tool for you to use as a framework with your patients. And of course, the value is far greater is if it's a standard part of your protocols. And this is just a little bit of the reports. Again, just differentiating the fact that we have very detailed reports. They're about 13 pages long. They're full of data. They're full of good information for you as the physician and for the patient. We have it set up so it's done longitudinally. Nobody else has ever done that. We have it set up so it incorporates our anonymous online questionnaire, which integrates into the report if the patients do it to give you clues as to why the results, factors that may be influencing the results. You can see this on the right-hand side of the screen. So if this individual, for example, is indicating they've got high blood pressure, we see that highlighted. We then have those articles on the right are then actual published papers that you can click on and go and look at those that are references to why high blood pressure contributes, in this case, to accelerated telomere attrition, so that you can discuss that with a patient. You can look at that together with your other clinical results, your more traditional lab results, your genetic testing results, and it's just giving you a much more powerful, complete picture of that person's health when you do these things. So just to summarize, this is really about a tool that's providing risk stratification for patients and the identification of individuals who have accelerated biological aging, to then enable earlier lifestyle modifications and to reduce stress, inflammation, and other factors that cause accelerated telomere attrition, to then go on and provide therapeutic interventions, which can be supplements, it can be vitamins, it can be more exotic things like stem cell treatments and so forth, to be then combined with, as I said before, traditional and genetic testing to get a bigger and more complete and robust picture of a person's health, and for the predictive diagnosis of telomere length can provide, and then finally to measure this longitudinally. Just like any screening test that we do in medical care, any standard test in medical care that is not a binary yes-no test, blood pressure test, body fat, anything, hormonal tests, cholesterol, these are all screening tests. And those are all tests that need to be done with a certain periodicity. In this case, our recommendation is annually. We don't promote repeating at 6 months because you don't generally see meaningful results at that time. But we also discourage just doing this once because that really limits its value. You would never just measure someone's blood pressure and then never remeasure it. That would never happen. So this is the same kind of thing. And then just to finalize, this is so easy. We are able now to provide outstanding kits directly to our physicians. The only thing you have to do is freeze a little gel pack. Patients don't have to fast. There's no spinning or work by your office staff other than drawing a single tube of blood, putting it in the prepaid FedEx air bill, and returning it back to the lab. And then the patient has the option and the opportunity to do the online questionnaire, which we think is extraordinarily valuable. Patients love it. Generally speaking, physicians love it. It takes like 15 minutes to do, and it dynamically integrates into the report, which, by the way, we can provide in about a dozen languages. So that's also very interesting. And then the reports come back to you in the portal, typically in 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the country in which you live, and often faster than that. It's really, really very easy. So with that, I'll just close with some of the support that we have from people like Dr. Shea and Dr. Andrews and Dr. Chang. These are KOLs in the world of telomere science. These are quotes that these doctors have allowed us to share with you. These are not paid advisors. These people support us without any remuneration of any kind, and I think it shows the quality of the work that we're doing and their belief as well that the technology that LifeLink has is the most valuable technology, the most valuable clinical test out there if you're interested in looking at telomere biology, if you're interested in looking at the rate of aging and understanding the efficacy of lifestyle programs. This is really the reference tool that you want to use. So thank you very much. You can see on screen, of course, our website, my own personal email, smatlin@lifelink.com if you want to reach out to me. And I'm going to turn it back to Jessica to allow us to do some question and answers. And just to remind you, and we hope that you'll take advantage from now until the end of the month, that we do have some special pricing, and we'd like to offer that. And thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Steve. So as you all know, on the top right of your screen, you will find the chat box. You just need to click on it and place your question there. We're going to give you a couple of minutes so that you can think about your questions and just place them. We will be with you in 2 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for waiting. I think we're ready to go ahead and answer your questions. Steve?
Okay, so we've got a number of questions here that I'd like to be able to go through with you. Let's see here. Okay, so the first question is, what do we do when we see a huge difference between chronological and biological age and a high percentage of short telomeres? Where does the alarm bell ring, if you will? So, of course, for a lot of people, you're going to see that their biological age and chronological age can be roughly similar. Of course, the greater divergence comes typically as we get older, right? So when we're young, when we're, say, 15, 20, 25, the genetic inheritance plays a relatively greater weight. As we become 40, 50, 60, 70, it's the environmental and lifestyle factors that are now becoming the predominant factors. And that's when we begin to see greater divergence around that gap, either for good or for bad. I would generally say that if you see differences of more than 5 to 7 years, then that's a red flag that there's some serious issues going on with the patient. So if you've got somebody who's 45 and they're getting 50, 52, 53 years old, that's quite a big divergence. And what we know from some of our physicians is they will typically then say, we're going to treat this individual at that biological age. So if there are procedures like, colonoscopy is typically performed at 50 plus, maybe they're going to be telling the patient that's something that we want to do, particularly if there's some family history of cancer. We've had doctors discover asymptomatic heart disease and other problems because they took these results and together with the other lab results, and they pushed further to look for signs of age-related diseases that they normally might not have witnessed. So I would say that generally if you see significant differences, then that's something that you want to be looking further into. Next question. Does inflammation conditions can interfere with the telomere length measurement, inflammation? So the question is it chronic inflammation or is it acute inflammation? We generally recommend that if you've had a cold, the flu, you're just recovering from some surgery, some trauma, of course that's going to affect your white blood cell count, and therefore it probably is prudent to wait until you're normal again to do the test. So we would discourage people from testing right after they've had a kind of unique event like that, or an event that may have altered their white blood cell count on a normal level. If you've got a chronic condition, asthma, allergies, or simply inflammation caused by obesity or a sedentary lifestyle, then measure, because that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at the impact of these chronic conditions. So then that's how I would separate those two. So here's another question about, do we want to check telomerase activity after we do some intervention? For example, taking telomerase activators, the nutritional supplements that now exist that people are taking more and more, to make certain that telomerase was activated. So the answer is, well, you can do that. And in fact, we have another essay. We didn't talk about it in this presentation. It's called Q-TRAP. Q-TRAP stands for Quantitative Telomerase Repeat Amplification Protocol. That actually allows us to measure the absolute level of telomerase in cells. So if you have people taking supplements and you think those supplements are upregulating telomerase and you'd like to measure that, then that's something that we can offer for you. It's not normally done because normally people don't have very much telomerase activity in their blood cells. But if you specifically have a reason to think they may have more because of a supplement or otherwise, then we can certainly do this. Okay, next question. How do we calculate biological age? So this is a good question. So first of all, let me explain that with the exception of life length, everybody else in this industry simply takes the telomere length measurement and they plot it on a graph, which is typically a downward line, and they put a little dot, and you're above the line or you're below the line. And it's a very simple approach. And that almost implies that telomere length is the unique cause of aging. And that, as we saw from the beginning of this presentation, is not true. It's the primary cause of aging, but it is not the only cause of aging. So because we try to do things with a lot more clinical rigor, what we do is we have an algorithm in which we take the telomere length with an approximate weighting of 40% and their chronological age of the patient with an approximate weighting of 60% and an algorithm to combine the two, with the chronological age of the patient reflecting those other factors like mitochondrial function and other things that we saw that we are not measuring for as kind of a base to compute their biological age. And this avoids such situations as having a 20-year-old person and telling them they're 50, or a 50-year-old and telling them they're 20, which are some of the things that I've seen in lab reports that don't apply this methodology, because it comes much closer to a biological reality, which is that telomeres are a major, major contributing factor to the aging process, probably the most important one, almost certainly, but not the only one. There's a question here about sending samples from other parts of the world, in particular about whether we can receive samples from Australia. So our laboratories are headquartered in Madrid, and I invite everybody who's joined us today that if you have plans to be in Madrid, please let us know. We're always super happy to meet you and, if possible, give you a tour of our lab facilities. And we currently receive samples in all of Europe, from the Middle East, from Indonesia, from Australia, from Israel, from North America, Mexico, Colombia, and hopefully starting soon with Brazil and Japan. We have in the past had a few samples sent from Australia. The problem was the volume of samples coming from Australia was quite modest. This is going back a few years. And we need to have a local laboratory in Australia that can do what we call the pre-analytic phase of centrifuging the white blood cells out of the red blood, out of the whole blood, and freezing it. And then the samples have to be sent on dry ice. So if you are interested in working with us in Australia, and I've seen this question, I would say contact us after the webinar, and we can provide you the more detailed information about what's involved to do that. It's absolutely possible. As I say, we get samples from Indonesia and other faraway places. We just need to have a local lab that can do it, and then it really becomes a question of economics. If it's just going to be sending 1 or 2 samples occasionally, it's just very, very expensive. If there's a steady supply of samples, then of course it makes much more sense. There's one last thing that I'd just like to share with everyone is we didn't talk so directly about it, but we are very involved with the largest oncology study, clinical oncology study being done in the world today in telomeres and cancer. And we were the very fortunate recipients of Europe's most important grant financing from the European Union, which is in a program called Horizon 2020. And the name of our program is called OncoCheck. And I would ask you to go to the website if you can, if you have a moment. It's spelled O-N-C-O, check, oncocheck.eu, like European Union. And we are conducting a 5,000-person clinical trial to understand the role of telomeres as a early-stage diagnostic biomarker for prostate and lung cancer, as well as a prognostic biomarker for chronic lymphatic leukemia and acute leukemia, as well as a prognosis in immunotherapies. This is some very serious work we're conducting. It's being done with 32 major hospitals here in Spain. It's a 2-year study, and the outcome of it is we hope to be able to demonstrate that our technology will allow, for example, an enormous reduction in the number of unnecessary biopsies that are conducted every day around the world for men who have high PSA numbers, but actually don't have prostate cancer, and to create the first blood test, liquid biopsy, that would aid in identifying people who are at very high risk of developing lung cancer before they actually develop lung cancer. So we're very excited about this, and I just wanted to share that with you. If you have an interest in this, look at the website and please sign up or join us for our newsletters or to follow us on our social media platforms. I'm sure all of us at some point in our lives have been touched by somebody who either directly or someone we love who's been touched by cancer. This is very important work that we're doing, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you very much, Steve. So people have to leave now. I just want to finally let you know that you can contact us on info@lifelink.com, and any questions you have regarding the presentation today, we will be happy to answer them for you. If your question was not addressed today, please go ahead and email us. Also, just to quickly go over it, the test is a very simple test. You just need to draw 10 milliliters of blood. So we will send you a kit to your office, and then once you receive the kit, draw the blood and let us know when you have the sample ready so that we can pick it up and upload the results report to your own unique physician portal that will be there in about 2 to 3 weeks after we receive the sample. We thank you very much for your interest, for being part of this project, and we really look forward to working closer with you. Thank you for joining us today.